Hey, I'm Sandy Warner with Warner Realty Group, and today we're going to talk with Adam Thayer of Sayer, Regan and Thayer about a fascinating little subject or section of the IRS code. Stop rolling your eyes. I can see you rolling your eyes. Yes, this is really interesting, particularly if you are thinking about selling your investment property. Maybe you've got a multifamily and you're tired of being a landlord and you're thinking, I'm filming this in Rhode Island and lots of us do at this time of year. I'm going to Florida. I'm going to take that money. Before you do, let's have a chat with your CPA and learn what the Section 1031 exchange can do for you. If you haven't yet subscribed to our channel, please click that subscribe button. Give us a thumbs up if you're enjoying the content we're putting out, and hit that bell. If you hit the bell, you'll be notified every time we put a new video out. Let's go and talk with Adam Thayer of Sayer, Regan and Thayer. Once again, my technology outwitted me and I somehow recorded him, but not me. But that's all right, you'll enjoy him. Looking forward to hearing what you think about this. Come on. Welcome back to the Warner Realty Group Tips and Tricks for Buyers and Sellers show. Today we're here with Adam Thayer, who's a regular guest on the show, and we're going to talk about 1031 exchanges. We're going to try to keep this very simple so that you can understand how it works, whether it applies to you, if it does apply to you, or maybe it's something you haven't even thought about that would really make things easier for you. So please join me in welcoming Adam Thayer from Sayer, Regan and Thayer. Hello, Adam, and welcome back.
Thank you, Sandy. Happy to be here.
Adam and I both have had hectic mornings. It's a winter in Newport with lots of closings and lots of heating and issue problems. So it's been a fun morning. We're looking forward to settling down and talking with you guys. The first thing we should probably talk about, if you're not familiar with a 1031 exchange, is that 1031 actually means it's from Section 1031 in the IRS code. And Adam, how does it apply specifically? How is 1031 used on a large scale, and then how is it used specifically in real estate?
Thanks, Sandy. So the first thing I think we need to talk about is just, capital gains taxes. So the whole point of a 1031 is to defer capital gains tax liability. And so prior to the Trump administration and their tax reform, 1031 exchanges, also called a like-kind exchange, was applicable to basically any investment asset. So if you had Pepsi stock and you could hypothetically 1031 that to Coca-Cola stock. Donald Trump obviously was a real estate guy. So when they did the tax reform, one of the things that they got rid of a lot of these so-called tax loopholes, but one of the ones they maintained was 1031 exchanges for real estate. And so from a macro perspective, the whole idea of a 1031 exchange is you are not cashed out of your investment. So as a result, it's not a taxable event to you when you sell. So if we have let's say you had a Babe Ruth baseball card and it's an investment, and you wanted to trade, you thought for some reason Babe Ruth's rookie, card was going to go down in value, and you sold it, you're going to make a bunch of money, and you knew Tom Brady was about to retire, and so his baseball card is going to skyrocket. You could sell the Babe Ruth card and roll the money into a Tom Brady card, and at the sale of the Babe Ruth card, you would not be considered a taxable event because you hadn't cashed out of your investment. You had basically rolled the investment from one baseball card into another, a like-kind investment. So that's the general idea. For our purposes now, luckily I know the National Association of Realtors was very proud of their lobbying efforts at the time, that it was preserved for real estate. So we can still do it for real estate transactions.
Which is great. And so I think, to clarify, one thing that I think some new people that go into it seem to think is that it's putting the taxes off. And that's actually what it is doing. It's not wiping out the taxes, it's deferring the tax event. Because if you're doing, the key word there is exchange. You're not selling and getting rid of your taxable item, you're trading it for something else, which can really help in real estate, because if you have a 6-family building somewhere and you don't want to live there anymore and you're moving, maybe you have one in Rhode Island and you're moving to Florida, you want to sell your one in Rhode Island and buy one in Florida, you're still going to do the same thing. So you want to avoid that capital gains tax, because of course real estate appreciates, and recently has appreciated at a massive rate. So you don't want to wipe out all of your gains by paying the tax on it. So how does it work? Let's talk about it specifically in real estate. How does it work when you're doing a real estate transaction?
Okay, so I would say there are really three buckets of 1031 exchanges that most people are going to fall into, from the much more common to the incredibly rare. And to start out, the general idea is somebody has a property A, or maybe properties, but usually property A. And as you alluded to, they bought the property for X. Let's just use numbers to make it easy to understand. They bought the property for $100,000. They put $50,000 into it. They have been renting it out because 1031 exchanges are for investment properties. They've been renting it out, and maybe they've taken $10,000 worth of depreciation on it. So at that point, they get into it for 100. They put 50 more into it. They took 10,000 of depreciation. Their what we call adjusted tax basis is $140,000. If they then sold it for $200,000, and again, if we pretend there's no closing costs, their profit would be $60,000, and that would be what their tax liability would be calculated on. That's $60,000 of profit. And that person, let's just say, doesn't want to pay the state and federal capital gains taxes on it. So what we would do is closing number one, they're going to sell this property. They're going to just hopefully let their lawyer know prior to the closing table that they want to do a 1031 exchange. I have had it happen at the closing table. Yep. Where people, they get the whole primary residence tax exclusion confused. And so what happens is at closing, the contract and everything is basically assigned to what we call a qualified intermediary. This is usually a CPA, a tax attorney, or some other entity that specializes in 1031 exchanges. And these documents are assigned to them. On the settlement statement, where you normally see all the calculations coming through, as opposed to the seller walking away with, in this example, $60,000, it will show them walking away with zero, because a line item just above that will show the bottom, what would have been the bottom line, the $60,000 being paid out to this qualified intermediary.
Right.
The funds at closing then get wired, or whatever, check sent to that qualified intermediary, who then holds that money. The seller then has 45 days to identify property B or properties B, C, D, whatever that they're going to transfer this money to. And then they have 180 days to close on them. And those time clocks run at the same time. So it's not 45 days, then 180. It's all from the date you closed on property number one. Those 45 and 180 days, they run at the same time. And then basically at the subsequent closing or closings, you could roll money from one sale into multiple purchases. The funds are coming in from that 1031 directly to the attorney who's closing that deal. What's crucial here is that the client, the seller / buyer, can never touch the money.
Right.
If you touch the money, 1031's dead. I've literally had closings where someone has walked from the closing with a check, gone home, told their relatives, they've said, why didn't you do a 1031? They call me back and I say, did you cash that check? No. And we literally drove back to their law firm and gave it back to them. We revised the documents and the money got wired. So that's how a normal 1031 exchange, 99% of them, maybe let's just say 98 are going to go. The second bucket is a reverse 1031 exchange. These are less common. I've probably been involved in 100 1031 exchanges. Of those, maybe 5 have been reverse 1031 exchanges. So they're much more rare, but they happen. I just did one last month. In that, you buy, then you sell. For whatever reason, you have to do it. In my guy's scenario, the buyers of the property he was selling delayed the closing, and he had a hard date for his purchase. So we had to buy first, then sell. We had no choice. It's more expensive. It's more convoluted. Basically, the qualified intermediary sets up a LLC for you that actually buys property B for you first. You then sell property A. And then with the money you get from property A, buy back the ownership interest in the LLC that bought property B. So it's a 3-step process as opposed to a 2-step process. And it involves setting up an LLC and all this other kind of stuff. So a little more complicated.
Right.
And then number 3, bucket 3, I've only been involved in it once. It's a direct 1031 exchange, which most people have never seen, never even heard of. I was just coincidentally involved in one where I had a client who sold commercial real estate. It was actually a bed and breakfast. And the buyer gave my seller 3 multi-unit residential properties in exchange for the bed and breakfast.
Wow.
So at closing, literally deeds exchanged hands. So that's a direct 1031 exchange. So those are the 3 kind of buckets of what we're talking about here, and kind of how the logistics of that closing process would go.
So the biggest thing to remember is if you own an investment property here in Rhode Island, now maybe you bought it under your VA loan for you and your family to live in. And then when you moved, that property became an investment for you, and all you did was rent it out. How long would it have to be that type of investment property for you to take advantage of the tax deferment under a 1031 exchange?
So those calculations can get very tricky. I'm not a tax attorney, I'm not an accountant. So when people come to me, I can talk to them about the logistics of how it's going to go and broad brush of how capital gains tax and stuff like this work. But the first thing I always tell them is we need to get your CPA
Got it.
or a qualified intermediary involved. Very, very broad brush. Usually we're talking about 2 years. 2 years is kind of like a magic time frame with the IRS in terms of when a property can kind of change what it's considered. Primary residence, investment property, stuff like that. But then you can also have, I've got a client right now where he's got a property where it's a residential house within a massive garage and he's got cars. He's going to keep some of his cars in a portion of the garage, but the whole rest of this very large garage and the house are going to be rented out. And so it's going to be partially an investment property, partially not. So you can really get into the weeds on this kind of stuff. And so that's why it's so important when you're trying to have your initial consultations with your realtor or your attorney, whoever it is, and figuring out what the finances and how the dollars are going to go throughout this transaction, that we get the qualified intermediary on board right away.
Right.
Particularly if you have a more complicated transaction where, let's say you have an investment property that you co-own with a bunch of relatives or friends.
Right.
And you're all, let's say 4 of you are members of an LLC that owns an investment property. You're going to sell it. 2 of you want a 1031 exchange, 2 of you don't. That's not even that complicated as to how these things can go, but already you're starting to get into a little bit of the weeds of the complexity here.
Yeah.
And that's why you want to make sure you have somebody who's not just a fly-by-night person who does this. I mean, like my office refers our clients to a tax law firm that just does these. And we've done dozens and dozens of deals with them. So we know that they are fast, have a level of experience, and they can handle everything from the plain vanilla to the much more complex.
That's good. That's good to know. So from the real estate side, our purchase and sales statements in Rhode Island do have the language for assignability of our contracts, which I've always explained to my people allows for the ability to assign in a 1031 exchange. However, we also add the language in the extra boxes. Do you feel like that's a best practice, or is there anything else you would advise a realtor to do?
I think it's always great to have it. When in doubt, put it in there. But I don't honestly think that the either party in a deal, one, they should not care, because really it has nothing to do with them. It doesn't impact them in any way. But we all know there are nutballs out there. We deal with them all the time. And so you could get somebody at a closing who, I mean, I'm sure you deal with it, Sandy, where somebody just says something insanely crazy to you.
Oh yeah,
go,
all the time.
All right, how do we deal with this? And so listen, that stuff can happen, and it makes it a lot easier for the realtor or the lawyer, whoever's having to talk that nutball off the ledge. Hey, it's right in here in the contract. You specifically said you would be okay with this 1031 exchange. So I don't think it's necessary, because it really doesn't impact the deal at all. I can't possibly imagine having to go before a judge and having somebody in good faith try to argue that they refuse to sign this for some reason. But when in doubt, put it in there. I think that would definitely be best practice.
Yeah, so as an agent, you're covered. It is always a good idea, I think, between agents to discuss the fact that it is a 1031 exchange, because it just gives everyone a heads up, like, hey, it could be slightly more convoluted at closing, but it really, you seller, it's, unless you're the one doing the 1031 exchange, it doesn't impact you. Your money is being handled the same way. If you're the buyer in a 1031 exchange and it's the seller that's going to do it, it doesn't impact you. They're just letting you know that there may be another attorney involved at the sale. That is it.
The only caveat I would slightly put there is if they're going to be really close on the closing dates, where, like, for example, in the deal that I'm dealing with right now, where we had to do the reverse, I wasn't involved in the sale transaction, and that was in a state that was not time is of the essence, and the lawyer on that deal did not put anything in that contract that, like, we had a firm date. It was going to be part one of a 1031, whereas on my Rhode Island purchase, it was a short sale that had an expiration date of January 31st. And so when the other closing got delayed to February, we didn't have any teeth to force those people to close, which forced my guy to do the reverse, which was, about 3 times as expensive. I mean, it still was 100% a no-brainer to defer the tax liability. But if the closing dates are going to line up kind of tight, you're going to want to treat it obviously like almost, the way you would a normal Hubbard, a property sale contingency or something like that. Or again, like we've talked about in our previous videos, If one deal has a firm deadline and the other deal is not times of the essence, you got to make sure that you're using times of the essence appropriately in your transactions to make sure that they're
Yeah.
lining up correctly.
So if you're the agent representing the 1031, you have to watch that time.
100%,
You have to,
especially with
yep.
those. I mean, the 45 days, you should have already identified the property within that. But if you're sneaking up on that 180 days, that's when the time is of the essence. Even if you're in a non-time is of the essence state, like parts of Connecticut, certainly here in Rhode Island, maybe other states that Sandy and I just aren't familiar with, that's when that time is of the essence needs to start being used.
And to clarify, the time periods, the 45 and 180.
Yeah, correct. So that's from the date that the first property is sold. So if you're doing a traditional 1031 exchange where you're selling then buying, or if you're doing a reverse where you're buying and selling, it's from 45 days from the first closing to identify property or properties that you're going to subsequently close on, and then 180 days to close on that one. But both of those two timeframes start ticking the same day. So
Yeah.
it's not 45 plus 180, it's 45 and 180, both ticking from the date of closing number one.
Yeah. So those dates have to be really specific in your contract.
Oh yeah, this is the IRS. They don't mess around.
But just bear in mind that even though this can feel a little overwhelming for you as an agent to try to suggest to someone, the savings is massive. And they don't have to buy property. You can sell property and buy into what's called a Delaware statutory trust. There are people around here that do that. And it's sort of like if you've ever heard of Fundrise or real estate income trust or any of those, whoever was selling, say you've got an old mom and pop here in Newport and they just don't want to be landlords anymore, but they're not ready and they don't want to purchase another property. They can purchase into real estate trusts that will have the same deferment. Remember, it's just a deferment, but it could be beneficial if you have two elderly people, which can sound grim, and not to give you tax advice, but ask your CPA about the benefits of waiting till one spouse passes, which I hate to say that, but can be a huge tax savings for them if they don't need that money right now. So just, possibly get into a real estate trust and don't sell that until down the line.
And another great point I think that agents should know here in Rhode Island is for we had the non-resident capital gains withholding in Rhode Island, 71.3. So for people who don't know, when a non-Rhode Island tax resident sells Rhode Island property, the state of Rhode Island collects for the capital gains withholding at the time of closing. If you're going to do a 1031 exchange on that form, when you get to like in my prior example where we estimated that the hypothetical person was making $60,000 of profit, the very next line it asks you is any portion of this gain not taxable at the time of sale. And in that example, we would put the 60,000 again on the next line, which would basically zero out the withholding. On page 2, you check off as a box says 1031 exchange, and you fill in the information for the qualified intermediary that you're using. And that brings the withholding down, in that example to zero at the time of closing. So you can advise your clients, at least in that respect, that if they're going to do a 1031 exchange, they avoid the withholding at least at the time of closing at a Rhode Island sale.
That is such great advice. That is so good for agents to know, and for real estate buyers and sellers to know, and any attorneys that are watching this. If you're not familiar with doing this, you can save thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars by doing a little bit of homework up front. And if you're an agent, this is a way for you to be a knowledge broker, for you to really be beneficial to your client. So anything else we should know about 1031 in such a really simple format, Adam?
Well, I think it's important, like you've highlighted that it's a tax deferment. So that built-in tax liability carries forward to the next property. I mean, you can keep doing 1031s and that built-in gain just keeps going with those properties. However, and again, there's a lot of nitty gritty here, so it's going to depend on the facts of everybody's situation. You got to talk to your tax advisor, but there are ways that you could wipe out that tax liability, either by eventually converting that property to a primary residence and then selling it, or by if you pass away and someone inherits it from you, it could hypothetically wipe out the tax gain, the unrealized gain in that property with we call a stepped up basis. So although the initial tax strategy is defer the tax liability, it's also possible to wipe out or reduce that tax liability at some point in the future if you're flexible, if tax laws don't change, So it's kind of very unique and personal to people, and you want to talk to your tax advisor. But tax deferment, definitely. Tax avoidance, potentially.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's it from me here at Warner Realty Group. Adam, anything else to share on this topic?
I think that's it. One thing, please tell your lawyer before the closing table.
Oh,
We're
yeah.
going to do a
Yeah.
1031 exchange. I mean, it's
But what we
possible to do
did
it.
just learn that Adam can probably save it, even if you don't.
It's doable, but we better hope that we have some comfortable chairs
Yeah.
at the closing table, because we might be there for a little while.
I'm Sandy Warner with Warner Realty Group. Thank you, Adam from Sayer, Regan and Thayer. We're going to put Adam's contact information up there for you. Adam and I meet on a weekly basis to try to put these videos out to help Rhode Island agents, buyers agents, sellers agents. If you're buying property, selling property, maybe you're a new lawyer in the area working on this project, Adam is always happy to help. His phone number is up on the screen. He's with Sayer, Regan and Thayer, based out of Newport, Rhode Island. If you like this video, click subscribe below and hit the bell so that you get notified when our next video comes out. I'm Sandy Warner with Warner Realty Group, making the complex simple.